Parks Live Radio. This is the Book Club. Give us a call, 567-777-2779. 567-777-2779. I'm joined by Allie, who you know from the chat over on TikTok. But we're here on YouTube today, and of course, anywhere you listen to your podcasts, to discuss Keys to the Kingdom. That is the book that we are talking about, chapters 1 through 10. If you've been reading along with us, if you've listened to the audio that we put out over on TikTok and TV Remix, we are here to have that conversation with you. 567-777-2779. This is going to be a lot of fun. We want to hear from you, your thoughts on everything pertaining to this book and to Michael Eisner's rise to the office of the CEO here on the Book Club. That's the nature of Keys to the Kingdom. That's what we're talking about. Allie, good to see you. Good to hear you. How's your Sunday going?
So good to talk to you. So good to be back. I feel like I haven't been able to be on the chat in a hot minute, but my Sunday is going fantastic. I hope that yours is as well.
I'm so excited. It is. I'm so excited to get into this book with you. We were chatting a little bit earlier today, and I can already tell that there's not going to be enough time to cover it all, but we're going to do our best. We're going to do our best, and we want to hear from you out there as well and your thoughts. 567-777-2779. Allie, right off the bat, what is the first thing that you're thinking as we embark? And we call it a book club, by the way, but it's really a conversation. It's a call-in radio show format, less of a club that you have to join. So let's keep it informal, no pressure. And if there's something you want to veer off on a tangent, go for it. But Allie, what are you thinking first and foremost as we start to tackle this Keys to the Kingdom book?
Well, first, I want to say also, I definitely wouldn't consider it too book clubby, right? I think that both of us, through any of the conversations that we've had, it's really been more of a conversation and open discussion. I would say even if you haven't read the book, you could probably chime in and participate in the conversation. So I agree. I don't think that needs to be like a pressure environment of like, oh my gosh, I didn't read all 10 chapters. I think that anyone can benefit from it. But I think that my first initial thoughts, and one thing that we talked about discussing, is the first 10 chapters really is about getting to know Michael Eisner, who he is, and we haven't even gotten to the point where he's taken over Disney or had anything, but how the book, in my eyes, is laid out is that Michael Eisner is maybe somebody that he's almost has more of like a villain type perspective, but that's not the vibe that I'm getting. I think that he's a very welcoming person, and I think that starts off right from the beginning. So if we just want to chat about who he is as a person and then his journey so far and, where he is for his career and all that he's done up to this point.
Well, I'm curious to hear from those that are reading along, those that are listening, what their idea of Michael Eisner is, because Michael Eisner, and I think history has been on his side, but I think Michael Eisner initially got a bad rap as CEO. And I think a lot of that had to do with things like adding gift shops to the end of the rides. But there are so many things that man did in conjunction with Frank Wells that changed the company, in many ways saved the company. And again, we talked about this earlier as well. We're almost full circle because, the company was in dire straits before Eisner took over. And chapter 10 leaves us right before Wells and Eisner head to Disney. But we're in a different era, but we're back to the same sort of story beat in respect to the company because the company is going through a rapidly evolving landscape, and who knows what the future will bring, both for leadership and for the company itself. I personally have always thought Eisner was a solid CEO. I think more times than not, people tend to expect more heart from a company. I mean, the man is there to make money, right? He's there to make money for the shareholders. He's obviously there to make the company better. And when it comes to the parks, improve the guest experience. But I think Eisner was a great CEO. I actually love the idea of having a gift shop at the end of every ride, especially when merchandise can be curtailed to a specific ride. And as a stockholder, I love those kind of ideas. And I think to think that a company shouldn't be making money is silly. And if you're going to want somebody to lead your company, you're going to want someone like a Michael Eisner who's willing to take those risks, because those risks that he takes pay huge dividends. Allie, I think the last thing that is touched on in these 10 chapters is the deal he structured at Paramount for Raiders of the Lost Ark. And that really rocked the industry.
Yeah, no, 100%. I would say that Raiders was a huge deal, and even, there's Star Wars, right? So that might all be like looped in together, but even the TV shows in the earlier days, right, were not necessarily Disney related, but I think that everything all comes full circle, and he was just realistically a smart businessman, and I think that that's where people almost looked at it as a negative aspect. Whereas he challenged those thought processes, and maybe he brought up new ideas that wouldn't have usually been brought up, and that's where people were looking down on him. And I think that that's in any corporate industry that I've ever worked for. It's if you are bringing up ideas that are different or used to, and they're not usually, in the norm, then they look at you like, oh my gosh, who's this crazy person, instead of welcoming those new ideas.
Until those ideas become successful, and then everybody gets on board.
Exactly.
All right, let's go right to the phones.
Yeah, once the money starts coming in.
Well, isn't that just it? Let's go right to the phones. 919, you're on the air. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Royce, it's William here in North Carolina.
How you doing, buddy?
I'm good. Enjoy listening to the show, reading the book. In my opinion, I think Eisner, besides Frank Wells, is probably one of the best CEOs they've had to date. He came in and completely redid the animation studios. As you know, most consider that Disney's Renaissance period, when all the great cartoons came out, Lion King, Mermaid, Mulan, all those he had his finger on in that era.
Oh, yeah, I agree. And obviously, he had Katzenberg there as well. And that Renaissance era you speak of is still being mined by the company today. Last week, Kenzie and I were discussing with you all, one of the topics was live action remakes. They're still mining the Eisner era.
Mm-hmm. They're correct. And most people don't forget Disney had its largest growth under Eisner.
That's right.
With MGM, Animal Kingdom, Euro Disney, the Tokyo Disney Seas, Hong Kong. That was the largest expansion they've ever undertook, and that was under his watch.
He raced to get MGM open. He raced to get MGM open before Universal opened.
Correct. Yeah. I read the book before, and I'm rereading it again. It's good to read what you kind of look over the first time that you actually read the book. But my question is, what do you think it would be like if Frank Wells didn't get killed in the skiing accident and he still had the rings over Disney?
Well, see, now that's very interesting, because I think that he probably would have stuck around longer. He once Wells passed, and this is, coming up in the book, but once Wells passes, not only does it redefine the landscape across Hollywood because of the executive reshuffling, but Eisner becomes less of a creative risk taker and more of sort of like a COO. And I think if he would have had the benefit of Frank Wells by his side through the rest of his tenure as CEO, then I think you would have seen possibly a Westcott, right? And for those who don't know, Westcott was the Disneyland equivalent to Epcot, and the previs on that was phenomenal. But I think you would have seen a lot more creative risk taking. He became secluded. And then in turn, alienating everyone around him by secluding himself. It doesn't really create a welcoming environment. It's quite the way he leaves the company is quite the opposite from the way he entered the company. So I think with Wells by his side being that counterbalance, it would have allowed him to stay freed up to take more creative risk.
Take more creative risk, right. And that's what the company, I think, needs now. I know Bob Iger's there to stabilize it during this transition period, but I think they need somebody from the outside with fresh ideas, just like Eisner was. And like you said, to me, I think the parks are going downhill. I know they're slowly bringing some stuff back, but they're forgetting the number one purpose is to create entertainment for the customer. And they're there for the customer. I know they have to make profits, but the customers are their profits.
Well, one of the interesting things that's coming up, and I know we're supposed to be talking about chapters 1 to 10, but like I said, let's talk about whatever you want to talk about. One of the things that's interesting is when Eisner first arrives to Disney as the new CEO, he asks his driver to take him to Imagineering. And Imagineering was so buried within the company and so forgotten, okay, meaning the parks, that his driver didn't even know how to get to the campus in Glendale. So one of the things I was discussing with Allie in preparation for this was the way we are sort of in the same environment, albeit a different landscape, but the same environment. The company's hurting. The parks are neglected. New leadership is needed. And what is interesting to me about rehashing this book right now at this time, and Allie, I'm curious on your thoughts here, is we are waiting at some point in the next 2 years for the next appointed CEO, who will more than likely be from within the company. When Eisner and Wells were brought in, they were completely new to the company, and Eisner was like a kid in a candy store. We need somebody with that kind of excitement, that kind of track record, that kind of bold decision-making, because I think one of the things that makes Eisner such a strong success story, and that's even prior to Disney, is he stood by his decisions, and he didn't care how ridiculous they were. He stood by his decisions. He was not afraid to fail. Most people in the entertainment industry are afraid of failing, and it's fear-based decision-making. I think what you have right now with Iger can't function the way he functioned when he first was CEO. He's now got to pick up the pieces. Okay, there's a little bit of rearranging the deck chairs going on. Okay, but he's got to streamline the company because the tech companies are gobbling up Hollywood. When Eisner took over Disney, we were just in the upswing of cable television. We hadn't even really, prior to Raiders of the Lost Ark, gotten into summer blockbuster filmmaking. We're now at the point that these companies are burning money on direct-to-consumer television, i.e. streaming. Okay, so, you're right. They've lost sight of entertaining people in the pursuit of the bottom line, and they'll churn out, and this isn't just Disney, they'll churn out show after show after show for these streaming platforms at a loss, okay, because they have no vision. Allie, you said to me you never saw Raiders of the Lost Ark. And I
have not.
And I find that interesting.
Hi, William. Yeah, no, I have not. And yeah, there's a lot of movies that I have not seen that I feel like I should have at this point. But I do want to quickly touch on something that you both have mentioned is where the new CEO is right now, and even for Bob Iger and Michael Eisner. I feel like when everybody is continuously just moving up into the company and they've been born and raised, quote unquote, in the company, you're stuck in that box, right? So it's more difficult to think of those new ideas and everything if that's what you've always been brought up upon from like a corporate environment, right? If you're continuously only looking at maybe you started from whatever level and then now you're taking on the company as a whole, you're still not going to come in with like that excitement, that eye-opening of ideas and everything, because that's all you've known is kind of what you've been seeing. So I agree. I think that that's also a reason why people might have challenged Michael, is that he came in with those new ideas. And I think that that is something that we need right now, because I would say that from my perspective, Disney has lost a lot of even just the core fundamentals of like, this is a place for everybody, right? It's not even affordable at this point for most families, and the benefits and everything are continuously stripped. But again, that's more of a completely different conversation. But I think that we need to get back to the core value, come up with new ideas, and be more modernized instead of, you know, the route that it's been going.
But to your point, I actually think it's all kind of part of the same idea. You know, a good story changes everything. It doesn't matter how much you market. If the story is bad, the audience at some point is going to latch on to that, right? You might have a strong opening weekend because of marketing, but, you know, it's going to go downhill. When Disney does something right, when they tell a story that is right and they create characters that leave an impression, it pays dividends for them in the parks. Prior to The Mandalorian, I can't remember the last bit of water cooler television that had an impact on the culture the way that Baby Yoda Grogu did. You don't get that kind of boost anymore. The media landscape is so fragmented.
Continued, right? Like, people are still obsessed with Baby Yoda. Again, I'm not a Star Wars person. I've never seen the movies, but I know that Baby Yoda is a thing. My daughter loves him. But that still continued, right? And even if you look at the two movies that were just released in theaters, how was Haunted Mansion marketed, and how well did that do versus even Little Mermaid, right? Little Mermaid, which was already a movie, same as Haunted Mansion, that was already existed, and it's just redone, but how it was marketed and portrayed and everything, completely different. And they are, I mean, one is super successful and the other one is not.
But The Little Mermaid gets the benefit of controversy, because in this world we live in the social media landscape, you get so many impressions on a site like Twitter, and I won't call it X, on a site like Twitter, you get so many impressions out of the negative press that it's still good for business, because that makes people want to see the movie.
Press is press, right?
but that's just it.
If people are talking about it, that's a thing.
But my thing is, they're also data-driven now, going back to this whole idea of entertaining the audience. They're also data-driven right now, that it's easier to make more Marvel movies and expect a return than it is to create 10 original stories that are far cheaper, okay, and hope that you develop something fresh and new. It's just easier and safer to lean on pre-existing intellectual property. Okay, so what's kind of interesting when Eisner comes into Disney, okay, is he starts saying, how can we leverage what we've got? How can we invite in new properties? I mean, look at what Pixar did for Disney, albeit by the time Eisner's leaving Disney, that relationship is soured. But he took the risk necessary to create what in turn becomes new intellectual property. You know, by the time Bob Iger comes in, he looks around the parks and sees nothing but Toy Story, or nothing but Pixar characters. So it's one of those things where, yes, a CEO is there to make the company money, but your customers want to be entertained, and they at some point will know when you're undercutting them and feeding them fluff. They will every single time. But you put out something quality. I'll go right back to Star Wars, and I talked about this last week too. But if you look at that last Star Wars movie that Disney made, okay, that whatever it's called, Rise of Skywalker, and then you look at The Mandalorian, it's night and day. One is fast food, the other one is an artisan production, and it might still be big budget, but it's like almost like the difference between an auteur and just, you know, everybody else, just another filmmaker. So I look at Eisner as the guy that saved the Walt Disney Company. I really do. And again, it's those creative risks. And again, to William's question, had Wells lived, I think Eisner would have taken more creative risks. And now you have a guy like Iger in the same position. He's got to appoint a new leader. And I hope that that new leader won't be somebody in the company, somebody that does come in with a fresh take. Because it's like Ali said, in the corporate world, the whole this is how we do things here doesn't work. Doesn't work.
That's correct. Right. Yep. Well, I'll get off here, Royce. Let you take another call. It was good chatting with you, and opened up a can of worms there. Keep it going.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Allie.
Yep.
So are you a...
I would say I want to talk a little bit about what you just mentioned, too, about him in the corporate world of challenging everything. I think that there's a couple of notes that I have in my book where he came out with these ideas of what really makes Disney. And a lot of the time he was shut down because they said, I'm looking at it, people would call him like absurd or unfit or outspoken or even just coming up with new ideas. And I think that's interesting. Again, I don't know if you maybe have some like insight on your media world experience, but I would assume that that's probably typical, right? Where people maybe have their own game plan for something, and then somebody comes in and they're telling you they want to go a completely different route.
Well, look at Walt. I mean, everybody laughed at Walt in the early days, whether it was, you know, adding sound sync to animation, whether it was taking risks with Disneyland. Everybody in Hollywood is always late to the game. Nobody wants to be left holding the bag. So innovation generally is reactive. Look at Netflix. The entire industry jumped on the streaming bandwagon when it was way too late. Okay? They took all the easy money from Netflix. When Netflix was like, oh, we'll license this show. We'll take Friends. We'll give you, you know, an insane amount of money. Okay? And then the studio, at the end of the day, realizes, yeah, in the short term, that money was great. But in the long term, we gave away the golden goose. We built the enemy. And now we're burning capital chasing it. So, you know, I don't know if that directly answers your question, but, you know, it's fear-based decision-making. It's not, again, why I think Eisner was such a bold CEO is because he came in with fresh eyes and said, I don't care how we've done it. This is the way we're doing it now. And he was completely unapologetic about it. And you know what was also really cool about him to me, Allie, and this is something else we touched on? He also clocked out. Like, he went home to his family. He went to his kid's ball game. He was not, you know, I wouldn't say he wasn't a workaholic because he was, but he had balance. You know, he, unlike Frank Wells, who was just an insane adventurist, Eisner was actually the level one.
Yeah. No, he he valued his family time. And that was brought up a lot as well. Is, again, this is just how I'm reading into it, but how I read it is it was looked down upon, right? Like, he would end the meeting and go, mid-meeting, if it needed to be, hey, guess what? We're done here because I have to go home to my family. And I'm pretty sure that in chapter 1 or 2, it was even mentioned of, if I don't go home, I'm going to have to get a divorce because I value my family time and I am going to go home.
Well, and the funny thing is, Allie, it's that family relationship that he managed to, you know, fit into. I don't want to say fit into a schedule. I'm being facetious. You know what I mean. Most of these executives didn't have time for that. Frank Wells was like, bye, family. I'm going to go climb Everest. You know, and I mean
in
Everest.
a helicopter. You know, if one thing I've learned, I'm glad I'm not rich, so I don't think I have this problem, but I'm never getting into a helicopter. Because I have not heard good things about helicopters or private planes. Not my problem, but hard pass.
Yeah, I've done the helicopter thing a couple times. I probably shouldn't do it again because at a certain point you're.
Oh yeah, you and Yowie did it. Yeah, I don't know if Yowie's on here. I don't know who's on here, but you survived.
Who knows? But okay. So what's interesting to me though, and this is later in the book, it's Eisner's son who is the reason we got Star Tours. and Tower, because he brought his son to Imagineering to look at all the ideas Imagineering was developing, and his son picked them. So Eisner was, smart enough to look at these things through the eyes of his child to see what would work best for the guest. Going back to entertainment, right? Now, again, everything's so data driven. Nobody's going to do that. Everybody wants to point to the spreadsheet so that if it doesn't work, they can go, well, you would have done the same thing.
Can you imagine, too, what the parks would be like if we didn't have Tower?
Oh,
I've never ridden it, but can you imagine like that? It would be completely different. I believe that studios then would be, most people look at Animal Kingdom, right, as a half-day park. And I know that a lot of people maybe, if you're not into thrill rides or if you have younger kids, that they might look at that at studios. But if you just remove Tower completely, change.
Oh yeah. Well, first of all, I'm an MGM purist. I have so many childhood memories from that park, and even today I can't totally accept what it's become. Obviously I accept it, but like the child in me looks at that original park that they built, and I was like, that was way cooler. I'm sorry, I love Star Wars, but like the backlot tour, the bee from Honey I Shrunk the Kids.
The backlot tour, yeah. The hat, and then you would have all those different picture areas of like the set scenes. Like all of that is very different now. I feel like I don't want to say bland because I feel like that sounds harsh, but that's kind of the way I look at the park.
Well, no, listen, they took a huge risk with Galaxy's Edge, right? So in many ways they did the very thing, but they were forced to because of Universal and Harry Potter. Disney had gotten to the point prior to Michael Eisner and after Michael Eisner has gotten to the point, particularly in the parks, where they have cheaped out. The original concept that was pitched to J.K. Rowling for Harry Potter is more akin to what Toy Story Land looks like now than what Galaxy's Edge is or what the Wizarding World is over at Universal. They pitched her a very, very simple concept, and that is, see, Disney can go either way, right? Disney could build California Adventure or they could build Tokyo Sea. They've got the ability to make everything top notch. But what happens from time to time is they're forced to cut corners. I mean, and California Adventure, when we get to that part of the book, that's a fascinating read. Eisner's development of California Adventure, because in many ways, the original California Adventure was not a Disney park. You could see right out into Anaheim. There were no berms. It had stock rides. It had stock art. It was the cheap out version of a park expansion. And the Eisner that we're reading about now.
It was a Dino Land.
Exactly.
Of Disneyland.
But he would have never done that in the early days. Like in the early days, he was taking those risks, Star Tours and Tower. But by the time he's done, he becomes part of the problem. But I just think, to go back to the larger question, I think all in all, time has been on Michael Eisner's side. And I'm curious if other people feel this way. Are you an Eisner fan? Were you? Are you not now? Where do you shake out on the Michael Eisner of it all? 567-777-2779. One of the things, Allie, is when Chapek was going through the ringer, a lot of people suggested bringing Eisner back. So it's kind of funny how time changes things.
Yeah, see, this is all, and kind of like what we talked about earlier today is you're coming in with more insight than I am. So it's kind of a happy medium, right? You have all this information. I am looking at this fresh, brand new. I don't even know how Eisner left the company. I don't know even if he's alive still. I don't know what's going on with any of that. So I'm very interested to see what the rest of the book has. Mm-hmm. And then even with California Adventure, I've never been to Disneyland or anything, but my perspective of it is I respect Disneyland, but California Adventure gives me a very, again, I've never been there. It's like a Six Flags type of vibe for myself. So I think that it's very different than the rest of the parks, and I definitely could be wrong on that.
I'm excited to see. I almost called it Six Flags because you said that. The original California Adventure, very much so. The original, yeah.
Got it.
Yeah.
So they redid it.
But see, again, Allie, that's the whole thing. Even though he cut corners there, if he didn't build California Adventure, if he didn't build that second park in Paris, then Iger wouldn't have had a foundation to improve upon. So there is something to be said for that. You know, to go out there and build a second park would have been a much bigger leap for Bob Iger than it was to do, you know, a multi-billion-dollar overhaul of a park that's sitting there. You know, so even in his shortcomings, there's still, I think, they're still positive. You know, they did that expansion.
I wonder if they would do you think that they would do anything like that in Orlando?
I think Orlando has too many problems to solve right now, and I think Bob Iger probably knows that. I think you don't really add a fifth gate until you have a problem to solve. Right now, they've got enough problems to solve within the confines of the four main parks. You know, I think,
mean, on a granular level, let's look at Small World, right? You look at that, and it looks like it's poster board and some glitter, and a lot of things are wrong. Most of the things are broken. So I agree. I think that there's a lot to even just be done on the ride aspect before you even get into expansion or more development.
Listen, you have. I could go on a tangent right now. You've got in Epcot alone, you know, Marrakesh is sitting there empty. Okay, you have everything behind the walls that's not Moana. Okay, whatever happened to the Play Pavilion? There's an entire like convention center, convention hall back there that's being used for bathrooms right now because they're having problems fixing the bath. I'm not saying they're having problems fixing the bathrooms, but the bathrooms are being redone over there across from Rose and Crown. So they have like 100 little projects, and then of course, again, I'll say it again, Dino Land. And then you go over to Hollywood Studios and you talk about the issues they have on Rise of Resistance and Railways always running down. Fix the issues that you've got now before trying to push people to a fifth park that you can't maintain and also won't turn a profit. Because
yeah, I mean they released in B23, but they were talking about a villains park, and I'm like, let's slow down a bit. Runaway.
Well, they said land.
You might get a fast pass, but you're going to get an experience pass on that.
They said
real
land.
Quick because it's never going to work.
The original concepts were floated for a park, but it looks like it'll be a land expansion. I just think to your point about, or to your question about if they would do that now, I think we're still another decade away from seeing even the conversation of a fifth park, because there's so much that needs to be dealt with now. And again, the rides are down like in a way they've never been before. So that culture is problematic, and it needs to be disrupted. And fresh leadership, both at the CEO level and both at the head of parks. Josh D'Amaro needs to go. Okay, when Iger brings in a new CEO, and what I'm really hoping for is that Staggs and Mayer come back. Okay, if anyone knows who they are, Staggs and Mayer left to they acquired Hello Sunshine through oh my gosh, why did I just forget the name of their company? Candle Media, and they've now been brought back to consult. So we'll see. But those guys, one of those guys should have been appointed CEO, and we would be in a very different reality right now. So, but going back to the book.
I think that the big thing is, going back to the book, I do want to talk about for a second, quickly, because he's only really mentioned, not too often, but Mr. Diller in the Yablans. I think that Diller, I don't know about you, but if he was my boss, I would hate my life. He doesn't seem like a pleasant person to work for at all.
See, it's funny you say that, and I can talk to you now from personal experience, is one of the first deals I ever did in LA was for a company that Barry Diller founded through another guy, you know, like one of these guys was one of Barry's apprentices, if you will, proteges. I always wanted to meet Barry Diller. Like, it was always on my list. I'm like,
Are you going to go with like a shield so that you can block all the pencils that you would be thrown at?
I would have loved to have worked for Barry Diller. I would have loved it. Richard would hate me saying this. Listen, Richard, who was on the live, who a lot of folks know is my good friend and former boss at NBC Universal. I walked in the office one day and a wireless mouse went flying right by my head and put a dent in the wall. So, it's not entirely new to me. And by the way, that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with the mouse. But I still could have gotten completely hit in the head with it. So I know, but when my whole thing is like, to me, that would have been cool. Like that would to be able to work. Do you know the movie The Devil Wears Prada?
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yeah, Meryl Streep. Come on. I know that I'm young, but
no. But I'm just saying that is the industry.
That's like the type of boss vibe that you want.
That's the industry.
I get that.
That is the industry.
Straightforward, easy expectations. Right. When I say easy expectations, I mean they're very clear. They're very written out. You know exactly where you stand at all times, which I think is very good. And I don't want, like when I work, I don't want compliments. Don't tell me what I'm doing right. Tell me what I need to fix.
That's
Be
right.
straightforward with me. Pencils and everything thrown at me. I don't know how I feel about that. Can I throw a binder at you then? Like, is it going both ways?
Generally, it doesn't. But you'll notice with Barry Diller, though, he spoke up for himself. So, that is one of those things in the industry, that you do get respect for speaking up for yourself because most people don't. So, look, Barry Diller was an innovator. And what most people don't know about Barry Diller is Barry Diller created the Fox network. The idea of having a fourth television network was unheard of. You have to be a brash, bold innovator to do any of that stuff. And Barry Diller is a disruptor.
I wonder what he would think about all the streaming sites then.
Well, he was a part of a lot of that
Like,
stuff. Barry Diller, I mean, I could go on a whole other tangent of Barry Diller. Barry Diller went out and started Aereo, which was basically internet retransmission of broadcast television, and he wound up in court over it. Barry Diller has always tried to break the mold. And one of these days we'll have to talk to Richard about Barry, because Richard worked for Barry, because Richard was the senior vice president of the USA Network, which was Barry's network. So Richard got to work for Barry. I never did. I've never even talked to Richard about Barry. But Barry Diller, you bring up Barry Diller to me, and I'm talking to you about one of the greatest unknown innovators of the media landscape. The general public does not know who Barry Diller is, and he's still going strong with all the internet sites he owns. All the e-commerce and everything.
The only question I have for Mr. Diller is, what did he do with the baby elephant?
Isn't that wild?
Where does it live? What's his name? Did he keep him?
Who did he give? Who gifted who the baby elephant?
It was the Yablans. I don't know if I could definitely be pronouncing that completely wrong.
That's fine.
But that is who sent him. They wanted to give him like the biggest, most obscure, toxic gift possible. So they gave him, hold on, I'm actually looking at the page. They sent him a baby elephant and then a baby pig. Oh wait, the Yablans then showed up with the baby pig and then a coffin. Like, that's toxic.
Well, but even the way these people are promoted is toxic. Look at how Eisner gets to where he is at the end of chapter 10. Eisner is hired by Diller, not because Diller thought Eisner was the best choice. He didn't want his friend David Geffen to hire Eisner because he was competitive.
It's like a competition.
That's right.
Right? It's like a competition of anything possible.
And the other thing that's interesting is, they talk about Star Trek a lot. And there's this line that always plays.
I've also never seen that.
Well, see, now we're on the same page. But there's a moment there where they don't have any film to show like Coke and McDonald's, or it's not that they don't have any film to show. They don't have the right to use any of the actors and anything, and it was whatever it was. It was a convoluted mess. So this woman who's running marketing at Paramount decides that she's going to just get footage of like the Klingons eating Big Macs and doing all this, that, and the other, and like brings them out on the stage and like does a whole like dog and pony show and gets all these major advertisers. And despite like the movie just being a bunch of talking heads, like makes it a huge financial success for the studio, right? And Eisner says, congratulations.
Mhm.
What, she's now like head of motion pictures or something. She goes from marketing to head of the motion picture division. And she goes, I don't
That's a
know.
big jump.
She goes, I don't know anything about making movies. And he looks her right in the eye and goes, none of us do. And that line right there encapsulates the entertainment industry as a whole, because you are expected to create a product, whether it's a movie or a TV show or even an album, okay, that a year to 18 months, maybe even 2 to 3 years from now, is going to be relevant to the general public and to the zeitgeist. And that's a very hard thing to do. Even with a hefty marketing budget, it is very, very hard to know where people's heads are going to be. And when something comes along that intersects with a moment in the culture, the way certain things have in our lifetime, they are few and far between. And a lot of the ones that Eisner gets credit for, he didn't even develop. He inherited them from a previous executive, particularly at Paramount at the point we're reading, but he gets all the benefit,
Yep.
Allie.
Which I don't think that I think that that's one thing, though, that people didn't like, right? Where they're like, don't put his name on anything. Don't give him the credit for anything, because even though he was involved, we don't want him to be showcased at all.
Yeah, but at the same time, if you're the one, in other words, if you remember recently that Batgirl movie got squashed, new leadership comes in and shelves something. So it cuts both ways. He didn't come in there and shelve things. He ran with them. He obviously needed product, right? And what I think a lot of people don't realize, particularly in the world of linear television, and what do I mean by linear television? I mean traditional broadcast television with ad breaks. The TV shows are there to fill space between the ads. It is not the other way around. The ads were not there to fill space between the shows. The shows are there to fill space between the ads. So there are many times that things are pushed to the public and marketed to the public when everyone at the studio already knows it's a flop. I myself worked on shows, Allie, that we marketed heavily, and we already had the shutdown plan in place. Now, those are more like talk shows just because of the nature of the format. But a guy like Eisner could have come along and he could have shelved a lot of these things. So for me, I'm like, maybe you don't get the sole credit, but this is the way the industry works. So I don't know. I look at where we're at in the first 10 chapters, and I think if it weren't for Barry Diller and his outlandish ego, if it wasn't for really in many ways Michael Eisner's parents, because they kind of pushed him to be,
Yep.
Jimmy Iovine is another guy like this. If you know the story of Jimmy Iovine created Interscope Records. He's one of these kids. I think he grew up on Long Island, had no direction and no real discernible skills, and became one of the biggest music producers of all time. You're talking U2 and Stevie Nicks and Bruce Springsteen. And he just was one of these guys that was out there, didn't know where he fit in, wound up in the studio, was hustling, from the beginning, whether it was, getting coffee to whatever it was always in the room, and stayed in the room long enough that when real opportunity presented himself, he was there. And this guy, I'm talking about Iovine as much as this applies to Eisner, went from having no skill set to being a master decision maker. And that's it. Eisner's not a filmmaker. Eisner's not a producer. He's just an
And
executive.
it's crazy that you say that too, right? Because he worked for how many different production companies?
And how many creative decisions did he make? Eisner created the Mighty Ducks.
Yeah.
He created the Mighty Ducks. That was his idea. You didn't have
You
executives
just said that.
developing.
Now that song's gonna be stuck in my head.
Well, I'm sorry, but you don't have executives back then creating film development. You don't have executives contributing to film development. In the world of TV, it's a little bit different, or at least it was. And that's one of the things that is touched on, is that he came in and he said, again, I don't care how it's been done. This is how we're going to do it now. And he applied a TV development mindset to filmmaking, which, by the way, is why that Raiders deal that he does at I think it's chapter 9 is so powerful, because he says, I know we shouldn't be compensating the talent at this level because it will create future problems for the industry, but I have to have this movie because I know it's going to be good. And look,
in your opinion, do you think that was the biggest deal that he made?
Well, for Paramount, certainly, right? That was the biggest deal he made for sure. At Disney, he probably made much bigger deals if we're talking dollars, But now, if I'm going to reframe your question, is that one of the biggest deals he made that had the most cultural impact? Quite possibly, because Indiana Jones had a major impact on the culture. But then again, like William brought up the Disney Renaissance, and of course Katzenberg was the direct overseer of that, but that's under Eisner's watch. So he made a lot of big deals. I think that deal, if you look at that deal now, and you look at what's going on in the industry now, you can see one thing that Eisner was willing to do is compensate talent accordingly. And in this case, in the case of Raiders, probably overcompensated by industry standards at the time. But now we're looking at the motion picture industry, looking at talent and saying, we don't want to give you anything extra. And they're barely compensating them as it is. And the way that accounting is done in Hollywood, they go out of their way to show losses where they don't exist, and they will sell things off to tax shelters so that they don't have to pay residuals to their talent. So I have to give him credit for that too, because here he is at that time going, I want this Steven Spielberg, George Lucas movie. And I'm going to pay for it, even if it upsets the other studios. And it says it in the book. Other execs picked up the phone and called him and said, what are you doing? You see, these studios.
Yeah, but it grossed more than $1 billion, right?
Yeah.
From what I caught on.
But these studios aren't in competition with each other, Allie. In many ways, they're really not.
That's a lot of money.
The executives are in competition with each other for bragging rights. And the studios are in competition with the talent to keep the money.
Sure. It's a money game, with anything. And I think that's where, if I had to sum up where I view Eisner, I think that he is a smart businessman. I think at this point, he's already challenged the scope or the norm, I guess I would say, of what everybody has been used to in any industry that he's been working for. And I think that's why people maybe disliked him, is he did that, and then they wanted to see him fail in those obscure and crazy ideas that he had, and he didn't. So then people were bitter about it. And then I believe that he, even though his family, I don't want to say he was brought up and had a rough childhood, but I think that they had very high expectations for him, and his father did not have a good relationship. But I think that for his own family, he was very family oriented, and he did a really good job of balancing both business and family life. And then I think that Diller is cocky. He's not my favorite right now.
But it's all insanely toxic.
Yeah, 100%.
And I will tell you, as somebody that worked in the industry for over a decade, that is the way it is. What is fascinating to me, though, is there's sort of a club of guys here that kind of go around together, So Wells and Eisner will meet at Disney, okay? Diller and Eisner, met first, where were they? ABC, and then went over to Paramount. So it's like you fail upwards with these people you've built these relationships with, despite how toxic these relationships may be. And you don't really, at a certain point, you don't really have a choice, right? Like, if you're Barry Diller and you don't bring Michael Eisner over to help you, then you're going to be sitting on the other side from him. Now, granted, like I said, the studios don't really compete with each other, right? But you're still, it's like, if I don't have him over here working for me to make my company the best, then he's going to be over there working for that company. So I may as well have him, even if I don't like him, I may as well have him on my team. And that's sort of what, people say Hollywood's really, really phony, but that's really what it is, right? Like, it is that what have you done for me lately mentality. And
well, it's business, right?
But that's where Katzenberg comes
you're
in.
just trying to make the most money efficiently. And this isn't like a whole family, like, kumbaya in a circle in a staff meeting. It's like you said, what have you done for me lately? What are you going to do for me moving forward? And how is that going to make me the most profit?
And Katzenberg leveraged that to his own success, because he was literally the guy that's sitting there in the movie theater, not to watch the movie, waiting for his pager to go off so he can help whomever, however. Because he knew that if he created a purpose for himself and was at the beck and call of whoever the power broker was that he was working for, that it would define him. And I was kind of looking at the names of some of the upcoming chapters, and actually kind of revisiting the names of the ones we've read so far. And the term retriever, golden retriever, Katzenberg is what they called a golden retriever. It didn't matter how big or how small the problem was. You could tell him, and it was really all of these guys, but this is where he plugs in. You could tell him that I needed this done, and he would work and work and work until it was done. He went through that whole thing with Leonard Nimoy to get him back to play Spock. He worked the personal relationship for months to get to the point that he could even have the business relationship. Now, you could say out on the outside looking in that that's highly manipulative. But he took the time. It's how the industry works. It's not like Leonard Nimoy didn't have a want as well. He wanted to direct the movie. In fact, the last thing I think he says to him, and now this might have actually been to Eisner, not to Katzenberg. I can't quite remember, Allie. But he says, this is the most important conversation we're having, because it might be the last one or it might be the beginning of us working together. So it's an industry built on everybody leveraging their own desires. And very infrequently does somebody put their neck out on the line. Back in those days,
well, I feel like
a
it's
lot
every
more
man
than
for
today.
himself, right? Like,
Yes.
I'm not going to scratch your back unless you scratch mine.
But Eisner didn't hide that. Eisner was very brash about that, and I think that's why, Allie, some people weren't big Eisner fans. It may still not be, because he was unapologetic about that.
He just, in my opinion, he just spoke the truth, and I don't think that everybody really wants anybody like that straight up.
I remember...
Right? Like, I feel like anybody that I've ever coached or anything, I'm like, oh, how do you want your feedback taken? And they're like, I want it straight up. And then you give them that, and then they don't want it. Right? So then when you have somebody in a business world who's coming to you with that type of mentality, you're like, whoa, back up, bud. What's going on?
I remember being at NBC Universal Television and called in a room to watch the pilots. Pilots are the initial episodes of a TV show. I think most people know what that is by now. Pilots are pretty much a thing of the past anyway. But at this point in time, we're called in to watch all the pilots that we had worked so hard to develop. We are the TV studio, so we are ourselves, right? This is our product we're watching. And at the end, they asked everyone what they thought. And someone I was friends with raised their hand and said, that show wasn't funny. And the response was, we'd really appreciate it if you could be positive with your feedback, because a lot of people worked really, really hard on that show. And it was like,
yeah,
we're looking at our own product, and all you
You're
want
like,
is positive.
wait a second, but you just asked for honest feedback.
Right.
The honest feedback is, I thought that this sucks. And they're like, no, it doesn't. What was good about it, though?
Also, we hired the people that made the show. So if the show is not funny, maybe we should do a better job hiring. Like, there was no there was no moment of introspection. It was just sort of like,
No.
don't offend anybody. And it's like, well,
No
no.
self-awareness.
Yeah, none. And that, again, that is the industry. So it was a big deal to have a guy come in and say, I don't care.
And challenge that.
I don't care that this is the way it's been done from day one. You know. Now, do you think we'll ever see somebody at that level again? Do you really think there's room for another brash, bold CEO, or is that landscape just dead?
I think that they would have to come from outside of the company, honestly. I don't believe that you would see that from anywhere inside the business, again, because of that box mentality.
Right.
You're, like I mentioned before when William was on the line, I've had this mentality. I know what everybody's expected. I know what's acceptable. I know what's not. I know where to draw the line. I know what to challenge. I know when to shut up. And I don't believe that we would get anything that would go beyond that or challenge the mindset unless they did not come from the Walt Disney Corporation, which I also do not believe that we're going to see. I think that we're going to stay like in-house.
Well, I hope then it's Staggs or Mayer, because even though they're not technically in the house right now, they recently were. So maybe Disney acquires Candle Media, and maybe that's where those guys come into play. I think that the rapidly evolving media landscape doesn't really allow room for it anymore. Look what's going on over at Warner Brothers. You know, they brought David Zaslav over from Discovery, a guy that worked in reality television, you know. So Discovery, I think, acquired Scripps, which is Food Network and all that. So when he brought all that together, it was home renovations and cooking shows. And now he's running everything from, you know, an archive of television that includes Friends and, you know, 2.5 Men, Seinfeld.
Which is completely different.
Right. And then movies, you know, coming out of the DC universe. It's like we're not putting leaders in position to take and make creative decisions or creative risks. We're putting people in positions to appeal to shareholders. And I think, you know, that's the problem. And, you know, talking about the parks again, you see it. You see the effects of cost cutting in the parks. You see the effects of it in the quality of the content that is put out. You can tell the difference distinctly, and I go back to this example, between Rise of the Skywalker and Mandalorian. One was rushed to make a release date, and the other one was nurtured.
Yeah.
So they're capable.
And I would say that even in the parks, like, you're surprised with how much cost cutting, I would say, happened recently. Like, it's not like 10 years or 5 years. I think that everything dramatically has changed within the last couple. And I think that that's what is concerning to people.
Well, and I think that's where fresh leadership coming in, whether it's it's all entertainment, right? So whether it's on the content side or whether it's on the park side, bringing in some fresh leadership, just like they did with Eisner and Wells, could be the very necessary thing that could carry the company forward and keep it an independent company. You know, if they don't do that and they rely on those that have been here forever, if they rely on the legacy executives to carry the company forward, then expect Apple to acquire Disney. It's going to take somebody from the outside.
Yeah, there's this one guy. I don't know if you know him at all. I think his name is like Royce or something. I don't know. But I don't know. He carries like a monkey in his backpack. It's not a live monkey, thankfully, but I feel like he should go into some sort of like leadership or take something on that would give like fresh ideas and give, you know, knowledge of what's going on in the park and what's wrong. But
listen, I'm not here to drink my own Kool-Aid, but I do think I am fascinated with the concept of a hostile takeover. I do think that at some point, you know, Comcast tried it. It was tried at the very beginning of where this book starts, in the prologue with Stanley Gold and Roy Disney. I do think at some point, if they can't do it themselves, then somebody does need to come in and take the company. I'm a firm
I thought
believer in
that
a hostile
somebody was
takeover.
coming over for a hostile takeover. I feel like I'm wrong in saying this. Was it Apple or was that not?
No, there was a guy, I cannot
But I feel
remember
like
his
it
name.
was it last year that we talked about it?
There was a gentleman, shouldn't call him a gentleman, but there was a guy that was buddies with Ike Perlmutter, if I'm saying his last name right. Ike used to run all of Marvel. And this guy was a bit of a corporate raider. I cannot remember his name right now. And he was trying to put pressure, I think, on Chapek. This is before Iger came back. And they weren't necessarily overtly going for a hostile takeover, but they were certainly kicking the tires. You know, and I can't remember the whole thing off the top of my head, but this is not new for Disney. I just think at the end of the day, what makes Disney special and what has always made Disney special, and again, I'm really talking about the parks, is Walt's vision and Walt's mission statement. And in many ways, Eisner...
I feel like we're away from that.
But Eisner brought it back.
I feel like the vision statement is not the right.
But Eisner brought it back in a big way. Whether he was consciously thinking about it or not, he brought it back. And I think it was Nelson Peltz. Thank you. And I think now it's incumbent upon Iger to find a CEO, to find a leader that will come back in and restore a little bit of Walt's vision, even if it impacts the bottom line. And I think what you're going to see happen in the immediate future is, and you can read about this online, I'm not the only one saying this, is you're going to see the company slim down. You're going to see a slimmer Disney. They're going to get rid of some of the things they don't need. And hopefully that's not to sell the company, but to preserve the company.
Yeah, I think that, sorry, I don't know if you can hear that weird noise in the background. Sean just put laundry in the washer and it's a little obnoxious. I don't know what it's doing. But I agree. I think that we need new leadership, and then what we need is an acceptance almost that there's going to be a leeway period where maybe the company dips more, but then I think that the payoff overall is going to be best.
And I think
to get back to Walt's original vision. And I don't know if there's anybody right now they're looking at the dip and they're not looking at the growth.
I think that the next chapters we read, which will be, so here's how we're going to do this. The next chapters are 11 through 20.
Yep.
There are 30 chapters in total. Mm-hmm. And we take 2 weeks off of these shows, and then we come back on September 17th with another debate show. And then September 24th yep. with the next follow-up on the book club. So we'll read the next chapters together as well. We'll do the same thing we've been doing. I think what will be interesting to read is how Eisner had to sort of learn the company when he got there. How him and Wells had to sort of mm-hmm. literally just open up doors and be like, well, what do we have back here? You know, and I think part of that rediscovery, part of those fresh eyes, that sort of kid in the candy store mentality is the invigoration that would not only help Disney, but help any company in that kind of situation. You know, I one of the things Richard said to me when he hired me when I was at NBC Universal, because he came from Universal and NBC had acquired Universal, NBC being on paper the smaller company, right? Even though they weren't. He said, I'm hiring you because you're not from NBC. You haven't been here long enough, and you're not going to tell me this is the way we do things here. And then him and I worked together to do things however we needed to do, however we chose to do, to get our business done. So from personal experience, I think that's the way to go. You know, and I can tell you from the little bit of time I spent working within the Disney company, that culture is stagnant, Allie. And work is not celebrated, proactiveness is not celebrated, and guess what? It shows.
Sure. That's how you get into a rut. That, like you said, I think you said it earlier, but I think that this maybe even goes for most companies, but very outdated mentality, right? Of we're already 5 years behind at this point. we're not thinking ahead for anything. And I think that that's the big opportunity, is not being so outdated in our mindset, how we do things. And I think that that's what Eisner brought to the table. So I'm excited to see where he takes the company now in the next 10 chapters and how that adjusts and where he brings everybody.
I mean, this man brought us Roger Rabbit. You don't get Roger Rabbit without Michael Eisner. Who the idea of taking
great movie.
But the idea of taking all those characters and putting them on the screen together was unheard of. Getting another studio to allow their characters to be in that movie was unheard of. And he got it done.
Yeah, it looks like we talk about Toontown in chapter 16. And the chapters are not very long at all.
The book is Keys to the Kingdom. If you are signed up for the newsletter, you can get information on the newsletter with links to a digital version of the book, with links to Amazon. Of course, if you go to my Amazon store, they're there as well. If you go to TV Remix and down to the If You Know, You Know section, all the audio that we read together from Keys to the Kingdom is there for you to listen. It is free. That is at tvremix.com. And we'll continue this. Allie, I appreciate you so much. Thank you, William, for calling in. I really hope as we do this, more people take the time to call in. There's nothing wrong that can be said. So we want to hear your opinions. You know, maybe you don't like Eisner. Maybe you love Eisner. Maybe you don't even know who Michael Eisner is and you just have a question. The idea here is to continue to build this community, continue to discuss the things that we're discussing both here in the book club and on the debate show. And also, Allie, I got to tease this. Another podcast, because I'm slowly trying to build up this whole media thing. Myself, Yoey, and Ellis. It's a lot of fun.
Oh my gosh.
We talk Disney and anything else that Ellis wants to talk about. So you can imagine where that goes.
Yeah, that sounds like a really great. And then you have the debate one with Kenzie. So all super interesting. I'll definitely have to tune in for you, Yoey, and Ellis. But always so nice talking to you. I feel like we could talk for hours, but I appreciate you and thank you again for everything that you do for us. And I'm excited to see what the next 10 chapters bring to the table.
Well, thank you for everything. And I feel like we did the show twice today because we had such a nice chat earlier getting into all this, because it really is, it's a bottomless topic. And the book is just the primer. So what I'm hoping, Allie, is on this next show that we do, we'll get to spend a little more time talking to folks out there and getting their insights. I think that'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, I agree. And like I said in the beginning, too, even if you don't read the book, I don't think that you necessarily have to read the book to join in on conversation. I think that really anybody can contribute.
I agree. And on that note, we are going to end the very first episode of the book club here on Disney Parks Live Radio. Thank you so much for listening. You can, of course, catch this show wherever you listen to your podcasts: Apple, iTunes, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon, and a replay will also be up here on YouTube, so be on the lookout for that. Thank you all so much for tuning in. I appreciate you. Allie, thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.